I knew something was wrong the moment she stopped asking about my day. Not that she was cruel about it. Rachel wasn't the type to be deliberately hurtful. She was too calculating for something so obvious. Instead, she perfected the art of the performative question. How was work? Delivered while scrolling through her phone, the answer already forgotten before my lips moved. Her eyes held the glassy quality of someone counting down the seconds until they could politely excuse themselves. We'd been married for 8 years. 3 years into it, she'd started this habit of checking her phone at red lights. 5 years in, she'd moved to checking it while I was talking. By year 7, the checking had transformed into something else entirely. An absence so complete that I wondered if the woman beside me had ever really been there at all. "I think you might be having an affair," I said to her one Tuesday evening in February, the words landing between us like a stone dropped into still water. We were sitting in the living room of the house I'd spent the better part of a decade paying for. She was on one end of the sectional I'd chosen. I was on the other, and between us stretched a canyon of indifference so vast I couldn't have jumped it with a running start. She looked up from her laptop, and I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt, not shock, but something closer to irritation. As if I'd interrupted a game she was playing. "That's ridiculous, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the patient tone one uses with a child who's asked for the millionth time why the sky is blue. "I'm just tired. Work has been brutal." She was a financial consultant, always had been. Long hours, high pressure, the kind of job that consumed people whole if they let it. And Rachel had always been the type to let it, had always been someone who fed on ambition the way other people fed on love. But here's the things about marriage. You can sense these things. Not the Hollywood version of intuition, where a wife suddenly knows. Her husband is cheating because she finds a lipstick stain or a mysterious charge on the credit card. Real intuition is quieter. It's the gradual realization that the person you're sleeping next to has become a stranger, that their hand in yours no longer carries a pulse, that their silences have a weight to them. Rachel's silences had begun to crush me. I didn't hire the detective immediately. First, I tried the conventional routes. I suggested couples therapy. She said she didn't believe in it. I asked her if she was unhappy. She said the question was complicated. I attempted to initiate physical intimacy, and she received my advances the way one receives a tax audit, with the grim acceptance of an obligation that must be endured. But it was her phone that ultimately broke me. I'm not proud of checking it. I've never been the type to invade privacy, to rifle through someone's personal effects like a thief in my own home. But desperation is a master key that opens doors we never thought we'd unlock. I found myself standing in the kitchen at 11 p.m., her phone charging on the counter, her thumbprint still warm on the screen from earlier in the evening. One look wouldn't hurt. One look couldn't change anything. The screen lit up at my touch, and what I found was worse than evidence of an affair. What I found was absence. No recent messages, no passionate correspondence with a secret lover, no late-night calls or suspicious photographs. Instead, there was a studied emptiness, a carefully curated digital landscape that revealed nothing except its own deliberate concealment. She'd cleared her history, deleted her messages, and set her location to off. Not the work of someone having a passionate affair. The work of someone who didn't want to be found. And that was somehow more terrifying. That's when I called Richard Castellano, the private investigator. I told him I suspected infidelity. He'd understood immediately. Infidelity was his bread and butter, his reason for existing. He'd asked for details, and I'd provided them. The changed behavior, the distance, the way she'd started staying late at the office, even when I checked and found the building empty. He'd nodded like he'd heard this story 1,000 times. Maybe he had. I can have surveillance set up within 48 hours, he'd said, his office smelling of old coffee and older secrets. We'll get you the truth, Mr. Chan, we always do. What I hadn't told him was that I didn't actually want the truth. What I wanted was permission to leave. What I wanted was for someone else to confirm what I already knew, that the marriage was dead, that my wife no longer loved me, that somewhere along the line we'd become two people living in parallel universes, occasionally colliding by accident, but never truly occupying the same space. If Richard found her with another man, I could leave without guilt. I could tell myself that I'd tried, that it wasn't my fault, that she was the one who'd broken our vows. It would have been so much easier if she'd been cheating. Richard called me on day 3. Your wife's meeting someone, he said without preamble. Unknown male, approximately 32, 35 years old, well-groomed, expensive clothing. They met at a coffee shop in the financial district at 2:47 p.m. No physical contact observed at that time, but the body language was intimate. My stomach didn't drop the way I expected it to. Instead, I felt a strange sense of vindication, like a theory I'd held was finally being proven correct. Where did they go? I asked. Restaurant in the warehouse district. They shared a meal, remained for approximately 2 hours. Afterward, back to a boutique hotel on Riverside. Room secured at 4:34 p.m. Exited the building separately at 6:02 p.m. I should have felt something. Rage, betrayal. The kind of crushing disappointment that shatters marriages. Instead, I felt like I was listening to someone narrate a scene from a television show. Interesting in an abstract way, but fundamentally disconnected from my actual life. Will you be wanting photographic evidence? Richard asked. Yes, I heard myself say. Everything you have. That evening, I sat in my office at home and reviewed the photographs. There was Rachel, walking beside a man I'd never seen before, and her face was animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her smile reached her eyes. Her hand found his arm naturally, as if it belonged there. In one photograph taken through the restaurant window, she was laughing, head thrown back, mouth open. the kind of genuine laughter that can't be faked or performed. I realized I hadn't heard her laugh like that in approximately 5 years. The photographs showed more surveillance footage than actual infidelity. There were none of her undressing, none of compromising intimacy. But there were enough images of her alive in a way she'd never been alive with me. There was the man's hand on her lower back, protective and possessive. There was the way she leaned into him as they walked, as if his presence was the only thing keeping her upright. I should have felt destroyed. Instead, I felt oddly grateful. Here, finally, was my permission slip. Here was the evidence I could present to justify my departure. Here was my escape route, already mapped out and validated by a man I'd paid $2,400 to confirm what I already knew. But I didn't want an escape route. I wanted to understand why. I called Richard back. I need more than this, I said. I need to know who he is. I need to know how long this has been going on. I need to know everything. Richard was thorough. By day 7, he'd assembled a comprehensive dossier. The man's name was David Chen. No relation to me, though the coincidence wasn't lost on me. He was a graphic designer, worked for a mid-size marketing firm, owned a condo in the Arts District. Most importantly, he'd been in Rachel's life for approximately 14 months. 14 months. She had been seeing him for more than a year while she slept beside me, while she wore the wedding ring I'd placed on her finger, while she pretended we were still building a life together. Richard also discovered something else. David Chen didn't know she was married. She told him her name was Rachel Madison. Richard reported, sliding a photograph across his desk. No ring told him she'd never been married, presented herself as a completely single woman with a completely separate life. As far as he knows, she's genuinely available. That detail crystallized something for me. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't a case where two people had fallen into temptation despite their better natures. This was deliberate. This was Rachel constructing an elaborate fiction, maintaining two separate identities, performing different versions of herself depending on which bed she was getting into. I wondered, suddenly, how many other versions of my wife existed that I'd never met. I can arrange the confrontation, Richard offered. That's when people reveal their true selves. That's when you see who they really are. I looked at the photograph he'd slid toward me. It showed Rachel and David walking together, her head on his shoulder. The image was so intimate, so genuine, that I understood something with crystalline clarity. Whatever version of Rachel existed in that photograph, it wasn't the woman I'd married. It was the woman she actually was, and I wasn't her anymore. I wasn't who'd made her like this, alive and present and full of joy. Set it up, I said. But as Richard began to arrange the logistics of confrontation, I realized something else. I wasn't angry at Rachel. I was angry at myself. The setup was theatrical in a way that made my skin crawl. Richard wanted to confront them as they returned to David's apartment, catch them in the moment, force the truth into the open, let the chips fall where they may. I insisted on being present. He agreed, though I could see the concern in his eyes. People do unpredictable things in these situations, he warned. Sometimes they get violent. Sometimes they say things they can't take back. I know, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. I stood in the shadows of the parking garage, watching through Richard's camera as Rachel's car pulled in. She was alone, checking her phone, a small smile playing at her lips. When David emerged from the elevator to greet her, she moved toward him, like a plant toward sunlight. Naturally, inevitably, as if it was the only direction she could grow. They kissed. It was gentle and tender, and full of a kind of affection that suddenly made me understand the size of the hole inside my marriage. Richard stepped out from behind the concrete pillar, camera in hand, and the world shifted on its axis. What I expected to happen, Rachel would panic. She'd scramble for excuses, accuse Richard of harassment, demand to know who'd hired him. She'd be angry, defensive, caught in the act, and desperate to contain the damage. What actually happened? Her face went completely blank. It was as if someone had reached into her chest and removed the part that made her human. Her eyes went flat. Her expression froze. And in the space of a heartbeat, all that light that had animated her in David's presence simply switched off. "Rachel," David said, confused, reaching for her hand. "What's going on?" But I stepped out from the shadows then and watched as my wife's eyes finally focused on me. I'd prepared a speech. I'd written it down in my office over the past 3 days. Accusations, recriminations, all the hurt and betrayal I was supposed to be feeling. I'd planned to deliver it with the kind of theatrical devastation that would make clear exactly how much damage she'd done. What came out instead was, "I'm leaving you." The silence that followed was complete. Richard stared at me, confused. David looked between Rachel and me, trying to make sense of the geometry of this sudden revelation. And Rachel just looked tired. "Is this about David?" she asked quietly. "It's not about David," I said. "It's about the fact that you haven't looked at me the way you're looking at him since we got married. It's about the fact that you're a completely different person with him. And it's about the fact that I've spent 8 years trying to be the thing that makes you look at me the way you're looking at him, and I finally realized that I never will be." I could see David processing this, see him slowly understanding that the woman beside him had been lying to him for over a year. I could see the hurt settling into his features like sediment sinking through water. "Rachel," he started, but she held up a hand. "I'll explain," she said to him, and then to me. "I want to talk to you, alone." We sat in my car, parked in the far corner of the garage, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Rachel's hands were shaking. I'd never seen her hands shake before. It was a strange time to realize how little I actually knew about my wife. "I haven't been happy in years," she said without preamble. "Not with you, not with the marriage, not with the life we built." And I didn't know how to tell you because I was terrified that you'd try to fix it, that you'd suggest therapy or couples counseling or some other thing where we'd talk about our feelings until we'd somehow convinced ourselves that we could make it work. And I couldn't bear the idea of trying and failing again. So instead, you created an entire alternate life, I said. Yes. She didn't deny it, didn't soften it with excuses or justifications. I created an alternate life because the real life wasn't working, and I didn't have the courage to admit that to you, to myself. So I split myself in half instead. Rachel the wife, Rachel the girlfriend, Rachel the person who goes through the motions, Rachel the person who actually feels something. How long did you think you could keep this up? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I didn't think. That's the problem. I didn't think at all. I was just surviving, getting through each day by having something else to look forward to. Something that reminded me that I was still alive, that I was still a person who could feel joy. And then I forgot that I was supposed to be that person for you. You could have just left, I said quietly. You could have just told me the truth and asked for a divorce. I know. Her voice was small, defeated. But I was a coward, and I was trapped in a marriage that felt like I was dying by degrees, and I was too scared to admit it. So I did this instead. I hurt you. I hurt David. I hurt myself. And I hurt that detective's career, probably, since he's going to tell everyone about the wife who got caught cheating, but turned out to be the guilty party, was actually someone else entirely. I couldn't help but laugh at that. It was grim and bitter and completely without joy, but it was genuine. The worst part is, Rachel continued, you were trying. You were always trying. You were always there, always present, always wanting to make it work. And that made it worse somehow. Because you were trying to build a marriage with someone who'd already decided to leave. Then why didn't you leave? I asked. Because I was selfish. Because it was easier to stay and lie than to face the consequences of telling the truth. Because I thought if I just held on long enough, something would change, and I'd find my way back to loving you the way I used to. But nothing changed. I just got better at lying. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent to the collapse of a marriage that had taken 8 years to build and approximately 5 minutes to dismantle. I'm going to marry David, she said finally. Or I'm going to try to. He's going to be hurt by what I've done, and he has every right to walk away. But if he doesn't, I'm going to tell him everything. I'm going to be honest in a way I should have been with you from the beginning. I'm going to build a life that's real, where I'm not split into pieces. Could I heard myself say, you should. I'm sorry, Marcus. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am genuinely sorry. I looked at her then. Really looked at her for what felt like the first time in years. She wasn't the woman I'd married. She wasn't the woman I'd expected her to be. But she was real, finally. And there was something in that reality that felt more honest than anything we'd constructed together. I know, I said. I'm sorry too. Sorry that I didn't see this coming. Sorry that I didn't do something before it got to this point. Sorry that I tried to keep you in a box you'd outgrown. She reached for my hand then, and I let her take it. Her grip was warm And I realized this was the most present she'd ever been with me. Not because she loved me, but because she was finally not performing. She was just there. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. And it was true. But I'm going to start by figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be the husband you needed. Maybe that's the thing I should have done years ago. Richard sent me the final invoice 3 weeks later. 48 hunt total for surveillance, investigation, and the confrontation orchestration. I paid it without complaint, though I'll admit the irony wasn't lost on me. I'd paid him to confirm what I already knew. And in the process, I'd forced the truth into the open in a way that couldn't have been more painful if I'd tried. Rachel filed for divorce. It was amicable, as these things go. She didn't contest my claims on the house, didn't demand spousal support, seemed almost eager to divide our life into neat, manageable pieces and walk away from it. I later learned that David had forgiven her, that they'd stayed together after a long conversation where she'd told him everything. Sometimes she'd said, "The person who loves you is worth the effort of becoming honest." My friends were supportive in that way people are when someone's marriage ends. They took sides with a kind of casual certainty, assuming that since Rachel had cheated, she was the villain and I was the victim. I didn't correct them. It was easier to let them believe that narrative, but alone in the house that now had my name on the title and nothing else, I understood the complicated truth. Rachel wasn't the villain. Neither was I. We'd just been two people trying to be something we weren't for someone else. And we'd done it so well that we'd forgotten who we actually were. The affair wasn't the cause of our marriage's failure. It was a symptom of something that had been wrong from the beginning. I went to therapy. Finally. Not couples therapy. Individual therapy. And over the course of 6 months, I came to understand something uncomfortable. I'd been complicit in my own unhappiness. I'd known, on some level, that Rachel wasn't present in our marriage. I'd known that something was fundamentally broken. But instead of addressing it, I decided that trying harder, being more patient, more understanding, more present was the solution. I'd made myself small to fit into the space she needed. I hadn't been the person she needed. But I'd also never asked myself if she was the person I needed. I just assumed that marriage meant accepting whoever you'd committed to and trying to make it work, regardless of whether the foundation was solid. It turns out I was wrong about that. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Rachel. She wanted to meet for coffee. Not to reconcile, not to rehash old wounds, but just to check in, to see how I was doing. We met at a cafe, not far from where she'd first met David. And I was struck by how different she looked. Not physically. Her hair was the same, her face was the same, but there was a presence to her now that I'd never noticed before. She seemed solid, settled, like someone who'd finally figured out who she was. "I got promoted," she told me, stirring sugar into her coffee. I'm leading a new division at work. It's demanding and complicated, and I'm terrified I'm going to fail, but I'm excited about it in a way I haven't been in years. That's good, I said, and meant it. I'm glad. And David and I are... We're taking things slowly. He's been in therapy too. We're trying to build something that's based on actual honesty instead of the convenient fictions we were constructing. It's harder than I expected, but at least it's real. I'm glad, I said again. What about you? She asked. Are you okay? I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? I'd hired a detective to confirm my wife was cheating, so I'd have an excuse to leave. I'd orchestrated a public confrontation that had revealed not infidelity, but something more fundamental. The death of a marriage that should never have been built. I'd spent 8 years trying to make someone love me who'd never been capable of it. And I'd done it with such commitment that I'd stopped seeing her clearly. But I'd also learned something valuable. I was capable of change. I was capable of admitting when I was wrong. I was capable of not staying in a situation just because it was expected. Yeah, I said, I think I am. I'm not happy yet, but I'm aware. I'm awake in a way I haven't been in a long time. Rachel smiled at that. A genuine, warm smile that held no regret, only hope. Good, she said. That's a start. We finished our coffee in companionable silence. And when she left, I realized something important. I didn't hate her. I didn't resent her. I was grateful to her, in fact. Grateful for being unfaithful, because it had forced me to finally see the truth about what we'd built together. Not every affair is a betrayal that demands revenge. Sometimes an affair is just the symptom of a marriage that's been dying for years. And sometimes the kindest thing someone can do is stop pretending it's alive. I walked home through the city streets, the afternoon sun catching the edges of the buildings. And I realized that this was the first day in a very long time that I was truly present in my own life. Not looking backward with regret, not looking forward with anxiety. Just here, now, aware that I'd been given a second chance to figure out who I was when I wasn't performing for an audience of one. It wasn't a revenge story. There was no triumph, no moment where I got to say, I told you so. No satisfaction of proving my wife wrong. Instead, it was a story about the moment I realized that the person I'd been trying to save wasn't her. It was myself. And the irony was beautiful. I'd hired a detective to investigate her infidelity. And what I'd actually discovered was my own. I'd been unfaithful to myself. For 8 years, I cheated on the person I actually was in favor of the person I thought I needed to be. And I'd done it so completely, so thoroughly, that I'd almost lost myself entirely. The confrontation with Rachel wasn't my revenge on her. It was my rescue of myself. I ran into David at a coffee shop about a year after the divorce was finalized. He was alone, ordering something complicated with oat milk and extra shots. And he did a double take when he saw me. For a moment, I thought he was going to walk out. Instead, he approached me with the kind of careful courtesy of Two people who'd been bonded by circumstance rather than choice. "How are you?" he asked. "Good," I said, and meant it. "Really good, actually. How about you?" "Rachel and I, we got engaged last month," he said, and I could see him bracing for a reaction. Anger, bitterness, some sign of the ownership that ex-husbands are supposed to feel about women they've loved. Instead, I smiled. "Congratulations. She's going to try to lie to you again, you know. It's what she does when she's scared." He looked surprised at that. "I know. We've talked about it. I think she's going to do better this time, though. She's aware of it now." "Good," I said. "She deserves to be happy. So do you." We ordered our coffee together and stood at the counter making small talk, like two people who'd never been on opposite sides of an affair, never been part of a confrontation orchestrated by a private detective, never witnessed the moment when a marriage officially collapsed. And I realized then that this was the real revenge. Not bitterness, not the satisfaction of being right about her infidelity. The real revenge was becoming so fully myself, so genuinely okay, that running into the man who'd helped destroy my marriage didn't hurt at all. It was genuine, easy forgiveness. The kind that comes not from absolution, but from understanding. Sometimes that's the best revenge there is. Sometimes it's enough to just be fine. I never wrote a confrontation letter. I never exposed her affair to her family or friends. I didn't seek vengeance or retaliation or any of the 1,000 small cruelties that injured parties are supposed to pursue. Instead, I learned this. The detective I hired to expose my wife's infidelity ended up exposing something far more valuable. She exposed the truth about me, about the ways I'd been lying to myself, about the marriage I'd been trying to preserve through sheer force of will. Even as it died around me, the confrontation wasn't between Rachel and David and me. The confrontation was between the version of myself I'd been performing and the version of myself I actually was. And that confrontation, it turned out, was the most important one of all.